Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Catherine Barrett, Senior Advisor at Route 50, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to today's program, The Workforce of Tomorrow, Arming Employees with New Skills and Technology, underwritten by Dude Solutions. I'm really excited about this conversation. My colleague and husband, Richard Green, and I have been writing a great deal about the public sector workforce, including 2 recent columns in Route 50 that focused on issues in attracting younger workers. Rich and I are currently working on a column that looks at the drop-off in applicants during a sometimes long and arduous public sector hiring process. It turns out the trick is not just getting applicants to apply, but helping them to stay engaged and not disappear during the process. This is not just a young worker issue. This is a 5 generations in the workforce issue. I know this will be a provocative conversation with 3 panelists who are among the most thoughtful managers and innovators in their fields. You'll meet them in just a few minutes. But first, a few housekeeping details. To the right of your screen, you'll find several icons, including the Q&A tab, which allows you to ask a question. We'll be fielding those questions toward the end of the panel discussion, but feel free to submit anytime during the discussion so you can get your questions in when it's time to stop for the audience Q&A. If you experience any technical difficulties, there is a red button at the bottom of the screen that says Test Your Connection. That button will take you to a help page. From there, you can browse a number of technical solutions, or you can chat directly with a member of our support team. This webcast is being recorded, and closed captioning will be available for the on-demand program. There's a lot we can talk about today: how technology factors into hiring and how it will help newly hired employees come into the workplace and help them accomplish agency missions. Some other possible questions: how can state and local hiring managers improve the way they recruit and hire quality employees? How is the role of training and career development changing, and how do you make sure that employees have the best tools at their disposal? How different will the workforce of tomorrow be from the workforce today? If we don't get to the topic you're interested in during the panel discussion, please feel free to ask a question. Now let's meet our speakers. Joining me today is Janelle Ford, Director of the Illinois Department of Central Management Services. She has a history of working in government administration and professional services and is skilled in nonprofit organizations, management, leadership, marketing, and strategic planning. And on a personal note, I was truly bowled over by her ideas when I interviewed her for our Getting Young People into the Public Sector workforce columns a couple of months ago. She took on her current role in Illinois in January 2019, and before that was Chief Operating Officer for the City of Chicago. Jamie Rogers is Deputy Director of the National Association of State Chief Administrators and is skilled in change management, continuous improvement, data-driven decision-making, and performance management. And she spends her professional life today engaged with state chief administrative officers and their staffs all over the country. In many places, as you know, these CAOs oversee state HR departments. And then Alex Smith, the Chief Human Resources Officer in the city of Memphis, who Rich and I have interviewed many times. She came to the city with a good deal of experience in the private sector, including at Target and Microsoft. And in Memphis, she has been the architect of mayoral initiatives in talent management, training, employee relations, compensation, benefits, and diversity initiatives. And you'll see that she's had some great ideas about the benefits and different programs to offer to make the workplace more attractive. And now let's go ahead and kick off our discussion. I'll tell you, I mean, Rich and I have seen over and over how difficult this is, and I'm going to ask Jamie to start because she works in all sorts of states. She's familiar with the issues that are coming up throughout the country. So, Jamie, set the stage for us of, what the hiring difficulties are right now.
Yes, thank you so much, Catherine. I'm truly honored to be on the call today. So what I'm going to highlight is about a year ago, we did a survey of all 50 states and really looked at what are some of the global and national trends happening in the public sector workforce. So there's a couple big ones that I want to highlight. First, which is really interesting, since about 2013, and part of this is coming out of the recession, the number of job postings has increased. So we're seeing that that's really increased now being about, we have some 2018, 2019 data. Nationally, those number of postings have increased about 30%. And a lot of this is correlated with the percentage of the workforce over the age of 55. And lots of states are now seeing a significant number of retirements. And so nationally, that average is about 35% of the workforce is eligible to retire. In some states we talk to, this number is close to 60 to 70% of their workforce, and then some have a younger workforce. But that coupled with more job postings, while at the same time, unfortunately, what we're also seeing is fewer people are applying to public sector jobs. So since about 2013, for state government, it's decreased nationally, the national average about 19%. So if I said that job postings are up 30%, the number of applicants applying for government jobs are down 19%. You're now looking at this big gap, about 49%. For the local people on the call, what is a little bit of a good news is local government, that gap isn't quite as big. Yes, they still have seen the same amount, about 30% of new job postings due to retirements and some growth, but they're not seeing as difficult. They're still not seeing a big growth, about a negative 1% decrease over the last 5 years in the number of people applying for local jobs. And so that's about a 28% gap. A lot of you on the call are probably very familiar with some of these challenges and why it's becoming more challenging in the public sector. And a lot of when we interviewed HR directors in all the states, they identified that talent acquisition and attracting new talent as one of their top challenges coming forward. And part of these reasons why it's becoming more difficult to attract new talent is that traditional value proposition of working in the public sector, of having a really secure lifetime employment, generous health benefits, a robust pension is dwindling. It still looks better than it did in the private sector, but what we're seeing in about 57% of the states, so in about half of the states, they've either frozen their plans or decreased some of their plans, some of their pension plans, while at the same time what they are contributing to health benefits on average nationally has decreased. So the amount they're asking their employees to pay has now increased. So that traditional value proposition is changing around government, but what we are still seeing is that the people that are trying to work for government in the public sector, the appeal of job security, benefit package, meaningful work, and serving one's community compared to people that we interviewed in the private sector is still a very valuable value proposition. So the only other two kind of national things that I wanted to highlight, which is kind of interesting, is there are actually the fewer employees now, government sector employees now, than there were in 2008. And this is a little bit of an old number, but in 2018, there was actually about 5% fewer government employees than there were before the recession. And so if you look at a growth chart, you really see the private sector growing, or you've seen the total number of employees at the state and local level has grown, but it stayed pretty flat. So that means that we're also competing in a really tough market. So we've already talked about kind of competing against the private sector. That lifetime employment is a little bit less appealing for this younger generation. But another thing that we found really interesting that I want to highlight is after we asked what your biggest challenge was, and compensation came back as the biggest challenge, the second biggest challenge was overcoming the negative perception around working in the public sector. And so that was something we really thought was interesting to highlight, because in doing our interviews with HR directors, they were saying, I didn't used to have to talk about the value of working in the public sector. I used to have a lot of pride in people working in the public sector. And so that's an interesting new trend, combating
Jamie,
that.
I was
Yep.
going to say that's kind of sad. I'm going to interrupt you now just to give Janelle first a chance to comment on the trends that you see nationally and how that parallels what Janelle sees in Illinois. Are you having the experience that applications are dropping that much? And what do you find? Also, and are you seeing that people are, and younger people, I guess people of all ages, are uncertain about working for the public sector, and what are you doing about it?
Sure. So, Janelle from Illinois. First of all, Catherine, thank you for hosting this call. I think this is a really important conversation to have, and I hope that we get a lot of questions from the audience, and maybe they can share some tips with us as well. I would echo everything that Jamie said, in terms of what we're seeing at the highest level in the state of Illinois. We have a very arduous process, which we're currently in the process of reforming. And I think for that reason and many more, there has definitely been a shift around how people think or why people think or are interested in coming into the public sector. And I think, again, to Jamie's previous data points, one of the things that I think is important to make sure that we kind of tease out is that we're also looking at different generations that have a very specific and very unique psychographic profile. And so for a lot of reasons, and I think some of which we'll explore throughout this call, we have individuals who their value proposition, what's important to them is different than for myself and my generation and my parents' generation. And I think that government in particular, I'd go further and say state government, has maybe not turned that, kind of turned the tide on that narrative in quite some time, and so it's taking us a while to catch up to be able to speak relevance to this potential employee base. And so a few things in terms of what we're doing differently. So one, I mentioned that we are engaged in a process that we call personnel reform. It's a short set of words for a very large and cumbersome process that we're trying to completely redesign. Our intention is to take what has been a 330-day on average process to put a posting out to actually get a person enroll, to reduce that down to 45 days. So 45 days from posting to offer extended. We started this pilot program last year. We kicked it off formally in the spring, summer of last year. We went enterprise-wide with a certain segment of our certain titles across our enterprise, and we are still at 45 days or fewer. And we have, for all of our collective bargaining partners, agreements in place or MOUs that acknowledge that this will be the new way of the future. I think that's a really important key for attracting talent, right? You're interviewing us as much as we're interviewing you. And so a year-long process means that we don't necessarily get the candidates who aren't necessarily the best in role, but we also probably get candidates who leave our process because they think to ourselves, this obviously can't be a priority if it took them a year to actually get to the hiring phase. And the other piece that we are, just really quickly, that we are doing differently, and we're thinking about it generationally. Right now we're focused, one could argue, maybe a slightly younger demographic profile, but we will be looking at others in short order, is really about recruitment. So I think in the past, the states haven't had to actively engage in recruiting, right, unless you had hard-to-hire jobs, titles, or locations. And now, to Jamie's previous comments around the data, we're having to actually drum up more interest for traditional roles. And so whether that is using technology, online platforms, using tools like a LinkedIn, using personal networks, going to recruiting fairs, really starting to be more intentional and more specific around finding certain groups of individuals and getting in front of them. Working with universities differently, re-engaging in terms of being a presence on campus. We haven't done that in years. Those are the types of things that we're doing that for some on the phone may sound like kind of 101, but for us, that hasn't been part of our playbook because it hasn't been necessary. So we are in some cases, I think, going back to basics. But I'd also add that we're very much using and thinking about how can we use technology to our advantage, and also how at the same time can we help reposition our brand so that when millennials are thinking about or others are thinking about coming to work for state government, the value proposition isn't just pension, benefit, job security. That it really is more around, it's just really more around purpose-driven work.
Yeah, I was starting to say that those are really great points. I want to turn to Alex's impression, but I have one follow-up question for you, Janelle. In getting all of these great ideas from the kind of the pilot stage to the enterprise-wide stage, did you run into any obstacles? It sounds, almost too easy.
It's certainly not too easy. It's not too easy. I would say one of the biggest challenges, and again, I'm sure some of my peers on the phone are nodding their head when I say, or will nod their heads when I say, it's our own kind of process management, right? Change management. It's hard to do something different, and to not just in CMS, Central Management Services, think about the hiring process differently, but then getting 40 plus 80 boards and commissions, agencies to get on board with this new process and consider this for our exempt employees but also our represented colleagues. That's a fundamental, I joke sometimes, I call this a generational shift. It is a completely new way of doing business. And for a lot of people, that has changed how they view their roles in HR, right? We're not a transactions group. I have a group that's called Transactions. We're not just about transactions. We're about relationships, and we're about being a resource. And that, I think, that change management piece, looking at jobs differently, looking at critical skills differently, what does an expert look like for that role? Those are the things, those are the hiccups. I found those were the, hiccups is not a fair word. I think those were some of the challenges that we saw that coming, but those are probably the pivot points in the process where we actually had to stop, take a beat, and do that one-on-one coaching and modeling with our colleagues, because that internal piece was probably the hardest.
Yeah, we were just at a conference with a lot of HR executives, and we kept hearing the term change exhaustion. But there's just so much change management.
You know what? That's very accurate. I would definitely say that my team I will take that back and give them some language to maybe verbalize what they may be feeling. I think change exhaustion might be accurate and completely fair.
Okay, now I'm going to turn to Alex. So tell us a little bit about how you're dealing with these issues, and is the city level different? Also, do you how much competition do you feel with the state? I mean, I know I'm asking a lot of questions, but what's your take on this?
Absolutely. So I would say from a local municipality perspective, we have the very same challenges. And I think for us it's been even more intense over the years as the unemployment rate has dropped, and people understand that they have many options. And so for us it has been very focused on how do we create a new value proposition for people to become interested in Memphis, and also reinstill trust. So a part of our challenge coming in as a new administration, I started with Mayor Jim Strickland in January of 2016, and coming from the private sector, so I really am a private sector HR person that happens to be in public sector right now. It was a very interesting venture to take on, having a new leader in the organization, and then with some of the interesting challenges we inherited as an organization in terms of a lack of trust. And one of the first things that we did when we came into office was we did an employee engagement survey, we did a compensation benchmarking study, and we learned really quickly that there were some challenges both from a pay and benefits standpoint as well as from a work environment standpoint that we had to address really immediately in order to improve our recruiting and retention efforts, particularly with police and fire. And so we ventured out on this journey 4 years ago to help improve things. And so everything from, and Janelle kind of spoke to it already, from a talent acquisition perspective, we moved to a cloud-based HR system. We improved our time to fill metrics, going from 120 days to 75 days on average for filling our positions. We start to really understand the data in terms of where we were losing people and why we were losing people, and having more direct conversations to try to improve the work environment, using our employee engagement surveys to guide us there. And from an internal HR perspective, we really honed in on building capability within the HR function. And so establishing new offices, for example, we created an Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion with the purpose of creating a center around diversity and inclusion, and helping to establish employee resource groups and other things to help us with shifting the perception around the work environment. We also established an HRIS group to be able to really hone in on our people analytics and HR systems. And from there, we actually, and probably one of the most uplifting things we created was our wellness group. Because the healthcare cost containment was a major issue for us as well, and we needed to directly address that. So I can tell you there are a number of changes that we had to make as an organization to be able to move things forward, to be able to shift the conversation internally with our employees, as well as from a recruiting standpoint, be able to talk about government differently. One of the key programs I'm really proud of is we created the hashtag Be the Change campaign, and that was really important not only with recruiting for police, but for recruiting for a number of different roles where we were targeting more of a millennial Gen Z population, because we understood that we no longer could talk about even job security or longevity as being a premise, or benefits and pension for being a premise for coming to government, but we could talk about the notion of community service and being the change in the community that they want to see. And that was very successful for us and continues to be successful for us. We really talk about this notion of really serving the community and serving Memphis as being core of what we do. And that's
Alex, you're giving people the opportunity to volunteer while they're working, right? I mean, I thought that was a very unusual and interesting benefit. How's that working for you?
Yeah, so a major benefit is that we offer paid volunteer time, so people are able to mentor and volunteer as long as they get supervisor approval and they're in good performance standing. They can get 5 hours per pay period to be able to volunteer on city time, and that's been great, both in terms of us increasing the number of people who are mentoring, particularly our young people, but also just allowing for people to, once again, commit to service. And that's, at the end of the day, that's really what the heart of our core values are as an organization, and what we found resonates with people in terms of why working for government is so impactful. Another interesting benefit that we've launched that I think we're still the only municipality to offer this is we have a student loan contribution program, and that has been extremely successful in us being able to have even more important kind of financial literacy conversation with our employees, but also helping our employees be able to get out of debt and move forward with their financial lives. And so that's been very impactful for us in terms of a differentiation perspective.
Hey, have you found that, have you done employee surveys to see, or candidate surveys to see how this is affecting people, what the results are of what you're doing? Have you won back the trust?
Yes, so we have seen with our employee engagement surveys. So when I started, our employee engagement metric was at 50%, and now we're at 74%. Of being somewhat or fully engaged, which is impressive. You can see on Glassdoor, our reviews have gone from being, I think it was 2.4 to now we're 3.5 or 3.6. And so we made improvements in a number of areas, and we also, to the point around changing the perception of government, we have created a much more focused social media strategy. So you'll see us on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and we're everywhere. And we're talking about the value of working for government. We're sharing stories about our employees. We're sharing inspirational messages. We're talking about the mayor and what he's doing. And he also communicates with employees on a weekly basis, not just employees, actually with citizens and employees. And that touch point from him as well helps the employees feel like they're connected and they're a part of the broader vision for the city, which is also helpful in our engagement.
That sounds great. Let's talk for a little bit, and maybe start with Janelle, and then give Jamie. Maybe you give a little bit of an overview about how technology is changing what you're doing in HR and how you're doing it. Is that having a big impact, and is this all still really evolving? Janelle?
Sure. I think, I'd start off by saying that technology has been a huge, maybe not a game changer, but I think it's definitely been a significant part of improving our internal processes. You don't get from 330 days, so call it a year, to fill a position to 45 days without really rethinking your processes, like what are value-added steps, right? So a lot of process reengineering. And then using technology to not only facilitate that process, but also to take some of the bias out of the process. So it's not just the doing, but how we're doing what we're doing, and using technology to do that better. One of the things that we just kicked off, maybe a month and a half ago, is our human capital management enterprise-wide leadership group, and we have governor office sponsorship, and we're really trying to think through the whole entire life cycle of an employee, right? So arguably it starts with recruiting and getting the individual interested in joining state government. What is their process as we bring them into the organization? And then what is our process for managing them, right? Developing them, coaching them, and then helping them to be better employees, and I'd argue better humans, right? And then hopefully, therefore, better productive employees. And so we kicked off the HCM part of our ERP system, and we're really looking forward to how technology will help us better manage that for every employee, represented or exempt. And then
Janelle, I'm going to interrupt. You said you kicked off the
human capital management, HCM.
Okay, good.
So we've been engaged in a multiple-year ERP, enterprise-wide ERP process. We started that with finance, and now we kicked off about a month and a half ago the human capital piece. So for us, it'll allow us to do everything from document retention to adult learning, right, which is not something that we do a lot of right now, and when we do, it's sporadic. And so really being able to push content, offer individualized content, and again, you leverage technology, not just for tracking, but for delivering content in a way that resonates better with adult learners. So we're excited about that process, and we're excited that the governor thought it was important enough to have sponsorship at his leadership and cabinet level to get that done. And then the last piece I would say around technology, and Alex was talking a lot about what Memphis is doing. We're not as far along in that process, but really changing the perception and the way in which the perception of the state as the employer, or a city in her case, and how we engage with people, right? How do people know what kind of organization we are and who we are as employees, and what kind of colleagues, what kind of environment we either have and or creating, I think has been important for us anecdotally. So we have been leveraging LinkedIn. I just had my new comms person start. We were without a PIO for months, to start a week and a half ago. So she will be kicking off other platforms as well. But the governor and lieutenant governor are really keen to support us as we support them in getting qualified, interested candidates into the state. And guess what? We all know we're fighting for talent. That talent isn't necessarily just in Illinois. So whether we're recruiting on campuses that are outside of Illinois, where students have a tie to Illinois, and or we're on platforms that obviously know no boundaries because of technology, and we're able to attract interest from folks outside of the state. We're really trying to be thoughtful, intentional, and creative around how we're reaching people for whom our message happens to resonate.
It all sounds very impressive. So, Jamie, how much is what Janelle is talking about going on around the country, and are you seeing other technology changes, or do you foresee other technology changes that will kind of shift the whole environment.
Yeah,
the recruiting environment.
This is one area we have started talking quite a bit about because some of the recent research is really talking about, well, whose role is it to upskill and train employees? Is that the role of the CIO or is that the role of the HR director? And how can we collaborate on some of the technology part of training? So I think that's something that's a really interesting conversation that states are having in some of the stuff that we're seeing. And then you're really going to see that technology have a lot to do around the culture and human resources. That's a growing conversation. I think we surveyed both private sector chief administrators and public sector chief administrators, and when they were saying what they're doing in the future, it was definitely the private sector is doing more around technology and intelligent technologies in the workplace, human-centered collaboration, more project-based work because they have these technology tools. But we are seeing about 12 to 15%, depending on which question we ask, of states are starting to do this. But it is the biggest area that we saw the gap between where the private sector chief HR directors are going and chief administrators and where the public sector currently are.
And tell a little bit more about what the private sector is doing that the public sector isn't doing.
Yeah, so our question kind of asked about intelligent technologies in the workplace, so implementing some more of those tools to supplement the workplace. And part of it is just the difference in a large organization. So a median state has 40,000 employees. Implementing a big tool like a CRM system or an HCM system is a much bigger ship to change. So that's where we're seeing that. And let me scroll down to some more of these questions. But that was some of the biggest ones.
Yeah, let me. I'm going to start to integrate some questions from the audience because there's some good questions coming in, and they tie really directly to what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Catherine.
Yes.
Catherine, this is Alex. Can I just make a quick comment about that?
Absolutely.
So, I think I have this beautiful luxury of being a private sector HR person, but also now a public sector HR person. And what I've experienced is that there's a challenge in both the type of systems that are have been invested in government. So you hear the term deferred maintenance a lot, and when it comes to being able to take on new technology, the capability and even the infrastructure gaps can be pretty large to overcome to be able to employ new things. And so I know when we decided to go to the cloud, and we were the largest, at the time, largest cloud implementation for municipal government, when we went a few years ago, it was clear that the biggest hurdle that we had was making sure that we had not only the right systems, but investing in a lot of training with employees to be able to understand new systems. And even after doing the training, we still had people that still wanted to revert back to the old system. So that change management was a huge component as well. And then, in our case, because the average tenure of our employees is 11 to 13 years, there's somewhat of a lag in terms of exposure to new technology. So helping to both upskill and train, and then help get people to proficiency points. It takes a lot of effort, and that may be a challenge for a number of government organizations.
Yeah, and I think you touch on a really good point, which is that a lot of this is not just the HR professionals. I mean, it's everybody working together. And Jamie was talking about this too. Coordinating through the government with making a better workforce, and collaborating on things like the training or career development or all of those things that go into not just hiring employees but keeping them. On the technology question, I see something coming in from the audience that asks about eliminating biases via technology, which is, our listener says is a laudable goal, but how can you ensure that the programming that humans put in does not include or perpetuate biases. And I think that this, we started doing a column about artificial intelligence and hiring, and we ran into a lot of skepticism from the human resource people we talked to. But what are your reactions to that? Is that something that is coming, and are you concerned about it? And I don't know who wants to field that.
Yeah, this is Alex. I'd like to address that first, if possible. So I can say we have started to look at the notion of leveraging AI in terms of bots and other things, particularly for our high-volume recruiting roles. And so one of the things that we're monitoring is kind of looking at what are the best practices happening from the private sector around this, and where are they seeing issues around bias. I wouldn't say we're necessarily nervous about doing it, but I would say we are trying to watch it carefully. That being said, we understand that first mover advantage is really important in terms of being able to capture talent, particularly when things are highly competitive. And one of the things you kind of mentioned earlier, and I wanted to confirm that, we, particularly for our public safety roles, we're not only competing with other municipalities, we're competing at the state level, and we're competing against large employers locally. And so being able to not only extend an offer as quick as possible, but really be clear about the value proposition and help get people connected to us is really important. And so things like AI can help with that. And we're seeing some really interesting things like with McDonald's and using Alexa and other things where we're open to it. But we just want to kind of monitor it a little bit longer.
Yeah, makes sense. Another question that's come in from the audience, we've got some people in the audience who are either involved with the federal workforce or work for the federal government or write about the federal government. One listener says, Janelle, you talked about the amazing reduction you had in hiring talent. Alex, you talked about that too. Can you be a little specific on how you did it? I think that's share some of our questioner says, can you share some more how you were able to get such a dramatic reduction in days in Illinois to 45?
Sure. So this is Janelle, and thank you for the question. So the short answer is, if you are interested and I give you some context now, I'm more than happy to connect you with some of the folks on my team, because I will not do it justice. The slightly longer answer is that, one, we had an issue. Two, I think we had political will at both the leadership level and the governor level, which is what we needed to really embark on the change management piece. And so it can't be overstated how hard this was for the team. We literally sequestered, I think it was about 12 individuals from different parts of the personnel team to move to an off-site facility. Part of CMS, one of my bureaus is the Office of Operational Excellence, known as Rapid Results, and you can think about them as an internal consulting team. It's not quite that, but that'll be good enough for today. And we started working with personnel to first document the process, and it's over 1,000 steps, then identified what was truly value added versus what was redundant and not value added, and then 2 or 3, then to step back and say, well, now what should what should this process look like in the future? And so we started internally with our internal capabilities. We knew, just given the complexity of it all, that we needed to work with some folks that have seen other transformations in different industries, including government. And so we did work after some time with a consultant who's been working side by side with my personnel team, my strike team, my hot team, and with my rapid results team. But I say all that to say it was tedious. I think it was very thoughtful. I think it was very intentional. But it started with just you had to lay yourself bare. You had to be willing to acknowledge the fact that our process took about a year, on average, some longer, some shorter, and be willing to go through the documentation and the very thoughtful process of figuring out the from to state. Where do we want to go, and what does that look like? And be willing to and I call it failing forward, right? Like, what if we don't make 45 days? But if we don't push to 45, we're going to be at 180, right? We're going to be at 90. So when I came in, I said 45 days. I think I said 40 days. I think I revised it to 45, and the team met me there. But that was not where they started. So I think it's on the ins and outs. We can definitely put you in contact with the team, and we've been working on an internal case study. So happy to share that with you. But it really came from a lot of thought, partnership, and leadership with folks in the agency, with our customers, 80 boards and commissions whom we serve, and then the implementation. The implementation sounds like the easy part. That was obviously the last leg of the process.
Yeah, and it's very, very interesting and impressive. Alex, do you have anything to add about what you did to reduce your time to hire?
Absolutely. So similarly, we had first of all, we had to recognize there was a problem. So one of the cool things that we have as an organization is we have monthly performance reviews. And we, as a new administration came in very focused on a data-focused, data-driven government. And so we have, on a monthly basis, we bring all of our chiefs and directors together to look at the most important key performance indicators for the city. And for areas where there's issues, we talk about it. And so for a while, actually, time to fill was not on there, but eventually started to come up as we started to talk about issues where, we were not filling police positions within a reasonable time, or we were having issues with our 911 or 311 areas. This notion of time to fill really came up as a challenge. And so once we dug in the data and saw where it was around 120 days, we actually had a Kaizen event, so similar to what Illinois did. We had a Kaizen event. We brought leaders from several different divisions, so we have 17 different divisions. And by the way, the City of Memphis, we're a billion-dollar organization with over 8,000 employees. And so we had leaders from different divisions as well as our talent management team together, and they were isolated for 2 days with a consultant. We had a Kaizen event. We mapped out every aspect of the process, and we talked about where our biggest issues were. And believe it or not, the biggest area that we had to address had to do with interview times. The biggest issue was that we had different divisions that would either delay giving an interview, or, they would be somewhat wishy-washy around the interview results, which allowed for a delay in us actually getting an offer out to candidates. So once we recognized that, we actually had conversations with leaders about that as an issue, and we put some SLAs in place in terms of the timing in which those interviews had to be completed, and if those interviews weren't completed in that time, we would take their rec down. And that was something that I was able to get support from the mayor and top leadership about, because they understood how important it was for us to fulfill our positions within a reasonable time. So we've been working really well. We're now at 75 days. Originally, actually, our goal was 90 days, and now we've moved it down to 75. And as soon as we get that to an even steady state, we may move it less than that. But been really proud of the team, and, of course, using data to make decisions.
Yeah, and it really feels to me like getting the time to hire down is important, because there is a big drop-off in applicant interest when it takes too long, and people get other jobs.
And Kathy, Jamie from NAFTA, I'll have a 1-minute thing I want to add. I think what's really interesting is we looked at the national average on days to hire, and over the last 10 years, it's dropped from 101 days to 73 days. But what's really interesting, and we were talking to states in really highly competitive markets like Austin and Nashville, and they're closer to that 35 days. They said that's still too long for me. So they've actually implemented on-the-spot hiring at some of their job fairs. And so I don't know necessarily the logistics, but it's something they worked through that used to be kind of considered impossible in public sector for them to actually hire on the spot. And so I think that's something really interesting in tight
Say again,
markets.
who did that?
Austin and Nashville, because they're in really tight markets. If they're standing there trying to recruit a nurse, which is some of the hardest jobs to hire at a job fair, they couldn't compete with private sector hospitals.
Yeah, very impressive. So we are almost out of time. One very quick last question, which I know the question is a complicated one, and if you could all just give like the slightest answer. I mean, just if you could answer in a sentence, how do you incorporate work-life balance into making your jobs attractive, and just like a sentence each. Janelle?
This is Alex.
Or Alex, go ahead.
Okay. So we have 2 free wellness clinics that are on site that people can use for care. We offer the volunteer pay time, so people can get pay time for volunteering. We have employee resource groups that allow for people to connect with each other. And then we also have other unlimited counseling and support services for our employees to deal with matters of the heart and at home.
That's great. And Janelle, anything real quick that you want to add? Because we're just about out of
I will
our
say
time.
we just kicked off a few weeks ago our benefits, our expanded benefits really focus on wellness and providing wellness for the whole employee, so behavioral, mental, emotional, and physical health. And we're looking to do a lot more stuff on site, but also bring more services to the respective campuses. And then similar to Alex, we have a lot of EAP and other vendors and providers that we want to make sure that our employees take advantage of, and so we're actively promoting those offerings right now.
And I would say that we also are hearing an awful lot about babies in the workplace and as a way of getting work-life balance in there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this has been great. Janelle, Jamie, and Alex, thank you so much for joining me today. That concludes the portion of today's program. And up next, we're going to hear from today's underwriter, Luke Anderson, Enterprise Solutions Consultant at Dude Solutions. Luke?
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, that was wonderful, guys. I got 2 pages of notes that I wish I could ask questions on, but that's not what this time's for. So hopefully we get some good questions from the audience. I think this first slide is so relevant because it was talked about right at the beginning. It was head on through the whole conversation, which is this idea about change, right? And the concept that we're talking about here, Dude Solutions, where we kind of come into play is this idea of change with technology when it comes to things like documentation, history, process, procedure related to infrastructure. So when we talk about change, the idea here, I'll hit you guys with some stats. The idea is that this change is occurring right now. It started a few years ago. It's happening currently. It's going to happen for a few more years. But there's, did we go too far? There we go. So this change is happening faster than most people can keep up with. The folks that are retiring, the baby boomer generation that's retiring, is not being replaced by the up-and-coming generation. We kind of look at this as a supply and demand issue, right? The demand is increasing because we're losing workers, but the supply is also decreasing because the people that are coming out, right, this idea of having a liberal arts education, going into certain sectors is not as appealing when in government we need those types of little grittier, a little more focused, a little more blue-collar types of folks that we're looking to hire. One of the interesting stats, I know I jumped ahead there, but one of the interesting stats that we found was when we were looking at the generational desire for mentorship. We found, and I'd be interested to hear if the presenters had found this as well, but we found obviously the most desirable age, the folks that wanted it the most were that 21 to 25, the new workers that were coming in, but the second highest were those 50 and over workers. It was those workers that wanted to better understand what type of technology, what types of things that are out there for them to learn about and grow with. And essentially that is kind of where Dude Solutions fits in. So what our role is, what we do is we provide work order and asset management tools specifically for individual governments, states, counties, cities, school districts. And the idea with it is kind of twofold. So first is on that demand side, right? As people in your district, as people in your community are leaving, as people are exiting and retiring or moving on to other jobs, what is it that they have done? What projects have we completed? What pipes did we replace? What bridges have we maintained? Right? Where and what is it that we own and what is it that we're working on? Pairing that also on the other side when we talk about this recruitment and retention, I like the comment earlier about it's not just about the benefits anymore. It's not just we have a great pension. There has to be more. It's the sense of purpose, right? When we're able to sit down and when we're driving with our family from A to B, when we live in that community, having that ability to have information about what we've done, what our community is doing to grow, where the construction projects are, where the new parks are going, right? Being able to share that kind of data. Same thing goes from the planning perspective. So if we're taking this information and we're saying, okay, this is where we're doing all of our work, how are we looking forward and saying in the next 3, 5, 10 years, how is this going to grow, right? As urbanization occurs, as people move back into cities, right? As lower populations continue to decrease, we don't have a great growth in rural parts of America in many states. So how are we going to be planning for this change in population? How are we going to be planning for the growth or the decrease in population, changes in services? How does this all apply? So I definitely appreciate everything that was mentioned. Like I said, I'm hoping there's some good questions. But from Dude Solutions, that's kind of who we are, and we're happy to underwrite this today. And thank you very much, Route 50.
Great. Thank you so much, Luke. And with that, we've reached the end of our program. Once again, I'd like to thank Catherine, Janelle, Jamie, and Alex for joining us today. And thank you, our audience, for tuning in. The event would not be possible without the support of our underwriter, Dude Solutions. The full webcast has been recorded and will be sent to you by the end of the week. Keep a watch out for it in your email and be sure to share the conversation with your colleagues. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.